How do you follow that? So anyway, my name's Simon Durkin. I'm the managing director for Shell's upstream business in Malaysia. And what I'm going to try and do is take you through a little bit an understanding of our business, and then some thoughts around how we're managing safety in Malaysia, but also related to how we manage safety as a global organization in Shell. Because before I did this role, actually in 2014, OPITO, I was actually scheduled to speak at the OPITO conference in Abu Dhabi. I had to pull off that on the last minute because I was the vice president for OSCC for upstream for Shell at the time. And David, I think, decided that he'd move the whole conference here in order to catch me this time. So anyway, he's caught me this time. So my apologies for 2014, and it's great to be here. I'm going to talk about our safety journey a little bit in Malaysia and talk about our safety journey globally, as I said. Now, first thing you've got to do is you've all got to memorize this, and I'll test you on it later. But, you know, don't worry, that's just cautionary measures from Shell in terms of the lawyers. Now, if I can, there. Now, let me take you a little bit around who Shell is in Malaysia. I think if you open up your book, you'll see we've been in Malaysia for 125 years. So we celebrate this year 125 years in Malaysia. It's almost the core of Shell in terms of our hereditary, and I think it's in a sense the core of the Malaysian oil industry. In the upstream, we drilled our first well. We drilled Malaysia's first well in where I currently live, in Miri, in Sarawak, in eastern Malaysia, in 1910. And we discovered oil. I think that particular well produced a fantastic flow of about 850 barrels a day. From there, we actually developed an onshore oil industry. But actually, like the industry today, we had to go through periods of change. We moved offshore. We moved offshore into the Baram Delta, which is actually an operation that still goes on, and it actually developed some of the industry's first offshore oil industry in the shallow waters in the Baram Delta area. Now, we then moved further offshore, and actually we discovered a problem. We discovered large quantities of gas. Large quantities of gas in Borneo, what do you do with it? And actually at the time, as I'm sure you can imagine, it was a problem. It was a problem for us. And I mention this because this is about how you change your perceptions. We turned that problem, together with Petronas, into a huge business, an LNG business. And Bintulu still is today one of the biggest LNG plants in the world. And then, of course, you have to further reinvent yourself. And we ultimately moved offshore into the deep water Sabah. And our first major deep water production came from Gumasut, which is an FPS in 1,200 meters of water in Sabah waters. And that's producing today around about 160,000 barrels a day. And our second deep water project is literally, as we speak, this is the Malakai TLP, tension leg platform, which was constructed in the Johor yard here in Malaysia, towed offshore this year, and as we speak, the first well is just being completed, and we're heading towards first oil from our Malakai deep water project in the Sabah business. So overall, a sizable business and a long history for us. But we, like you, face challenge. We face challenge commercially. We face challenges from HSSE. We have to continue to reinvent ourselves if we're going to survive. I think we have reinvented ourselves a number of times in history, but moving forward, we face that challenge. Now, I'm going to talk largely about safety, and it really starts with what is safety for Shell, what is safety, I suspect, for most of you. Our business, our purpose, is actually about producing oil and gas. And if you ask our shareholders, it's about making money from producing oil and gas. And we have to be honest with ourselves. If we don't make money from producing oil and gas, we won't exist. So that is our purpose. And we shouldn't confuse purpose with value. But we have a value that says when we produce that oil and gas, we will do it safely. We'll do it in a way that protects the environment, and we'll do it in a way that ensures that everybody goes home safe. Why? Well, I think David touched on that at the very beginning. First of all, license to operate. I mean, if in our industry, another Macondo occurs, it damages our license to operate, it damages our ability to work. It is something that ultimately as an industry we cannot survive. But I think there are two other much more important reasons. One is that actually, fundamentally, and I think this in times of where economy is putting pressure on us, we need to recognize, ultimately, good safety is good business. Why? And that's because the things you need to do to be safe are actually exactly the things you need to do to run a good business. You know, if you are planning poorly, you will have high costs, late projects, and you'll hurt people. If you design poorly, you will overpay, things won't work properly, and you'll hurt people. If you have the right standards, if you have the right competent people, you will not only do a good job, but you'll actually also keep people safe. And actually, I fundamentally believe that it's actually leading through keeping people safe that you can actually ensure that you run an efficient and effective business. Now, the third reason, I think all of us understand the third reason. It's probably the thing that keeps us, most of us, getting out of bed in this room every morning who are working in HSSE. And the third reason is we want everybody to go home to their family. Ultimately, this is about everybody going home to their family. And actually, maybe we should change we should change the job title on an HSSE, and it should simply say, getting everybody home safe. Because that is actually ultimately what your job is about. Now, if I move on and look at our safety performance and our safety trajectory, as this is Shell Malaysia, I suspect that you would see something very similar for most of the other operators. What you see is in the early days, this up and down, up and down. And that was when we lived in a world of reactive safety. You know, we waited until we had an accident, and then we discovered what we did wrong in the accident. We tried to fix it, and we brought attention to things, and it went back down. And then we had another accident, and then it went back down. Until around about 1995, where we introduced the HSE management system. And you see that on this slide here in the middle, the HSE management system. And that puts structure around how we approach safety. And that structure was essential. And you can see the drop, the huge impact it's had on Shell Malaysia, and if you went globally, you'd see a similar. Now, structure in its own right actually is very beneficial, but it doesn't get to the hearts of individuals. And actually, at the end of the day, we talked earlier, Hamish talked about behavior. And at the end of the day, if you want to get to the hearts of individuals, you've got to, what did Hamish say? He said, you've got to make it easy. You've got to make it easy. And we're talking about getting to the hearts of hundreds of thousands of individuals. So how did we make it easy? The life-saving rules. We made it easy with the life-saving rules, and then you can see that second drop around about 2009. And I can tell you globally in Shell, that was the point at which and I hate to admit it, that was the point at which our global company fatality rate went down from about 30, 35 a year to what it is today, which is about 5 to 8, 5 in a normal year. Now, that's not acceptable, but can you imagine that jump? And why? Because we made it easy. We have people in our organization now who know what they need to do, those very simple rules. And it's great that actually as an industry, through IOGP, we've taken those on, and actually they are now an industry standard. I think IOGP has slightly more, but it's a cut and paste, and everybody, I think, uses the same symbols, which I think is a great success in the industry. It's a pity that we can only point to so few successes like that where we have really globalized our standards. So I'm going to take you through a few areas where we've been focusing on and a few thoughts around those areas. Firstly, asset integrity. Now, the story on asset integrity, I mean, I think for all of us has been a history which has followed a little bit behind the personal safety. And actually, it's been an awakener to us to realize that actually the importance of asset integrity. I mean, the famous phrase that comes up in mind, you know, an aircraft doesn't count its safety based on the safety of the baggage handlers, the TRC of the baggage handlers. It counts its safety based on how many planes it keeps in the air. Because the TRC in the baggage handlers is dominating, but often in our business we get distracted by that. But ultimately it's these big incidents that define our safety as an industry. Now we've had in Shell, the top right, we've had this approach to design, and an approach to ensuring once we've built something that it retains its technical integrity and we maintain it. And we had an approach to operating integrity and leadership around that. But I have to admit, in a classic Shell way, we made it very, very complicated. We had 28 blades. We had a whole asset integrity safety program. And actually what was interesting, again, it comes back to this concept to make it easy. What was interesting was that when I was in my previous job talking to leaders, they couldn't talk to asset integrity. They could say, asset integrity is very important, and that was as far as they could go because it got so complicated. It's exactly like standing in front of that curtain and looking at 50 passengers. What do I say? Senior leaders in the organization. So we had to equip them and our staff with something that we could, all of us, grasp. Now, our communication people, don't like me to call them, but we actually called them the 5 lines in the sand. The 5 things that we're absolutely going to do, and these are they. Operating integrity and maintenance integrity, 2 key processes that we sustain and we audit on every facility every year to ensure that actually they're operating effectively, meaning that we're maintaining the equipment in line with the design and we're operating the equipment in line with the design. And then 3 key risk areas that basically say, now the slides have got distorted, but basically say no overdue safety critical equipment maintenance, no high-risk wells, and no high-risk pipelines in operation. And as a way we assess the risk. And leaders can talk to that. And actually the consequence of that has been a dramatic increase in terms of our adherence and reduction in terms of major safety PSEs in our business. Now here's another challenge for you. Construction sites. You know, 2-3 years ago, probably still the case, I would visit construction sites, whether it's in Korea or in Malaysia, and there'd be Shell, I'd be there to look at a Shell site, and then next door would be Conoco, and next door would be Petronas, and next door would be Exxon, and all of us would operate to slightly different standards. And the same contractor would have to operate to slightly different standards on every single one of the sites. And I'd go inside Shell, and I'd see the same. I'd go to a Shell operation in Malaysia for a construction site, or a Shell operation in England for a construction site, or Shell operation in Nigeria, and they'd all be slightly different. So what we've tried to do in the last 3 to 4 years is say, how can we make it that every site does the same, every site looks the same, every site feels the same, and you know you'll get the same on every site, which is our construction site standardization. And I'm going to make a plea to Gordon here. Wouldn't it be good if through IOGP we could start to create something that was an industry standard? So if I go to Hyundai in Korea, I would see the same across the industry. Now, another area we'll be looking at is learning. How good are we at learning from incidents? You ask yourself, how good are we at learning from incidents? Well, I don't know how good your organizations are, but I can tell you in Shell, we're historically awful. Awful. 80% of our incidents are repeat incidents. And why? Well, we've got this whole organization, learning from incidents organization, creating emails, creating alerts. We pride ourselves on how many alerts we distributed, 130 this year. And they actually have no impact whatsoever. Most emails arrive and people look at it and say, is it directly related to my job today and what I see? No, into box 13, the bin. So how do you get people to learn? What do you do to learn? And that's where we've been starting to work on the concept of reflective learning. What you actually find is if you want people to learn, They've got to experience. People learn best through experiencing. So you've got to distill down your few key areas. For us, for example, one keyhole campaign was around line of fire, putting yourself in the line of fire. And then you've actually got to take people through a learning experience with videos and great modern technology where you actually start to put them in situations where in the line of fire, and they understand what it means to be in the line of fire, and then they think about how they're going to get themselves out of it, and they understand what they're going to do to protect their people. Now, an interesting one here, Hamish, about job descriptions. The guys who were working for me creating this, they kept coming in and saying, the video's going great, Simon. It's a great video. And I said, what's your job? And they said, creating a video. This video ended up being 6 months late. Why? Because I had to have a conversation with them. Your job is not creating a video. Your job is making sure this never happens again. I will not judge you by the quality of the video. I will judge you by the quality of times that people get killed through line of fire incidents. Go away and think how you're going to stop Shell globally killing people through line of fire incidents. That's the job description. That's the idea of the question that you need to ask in order to get to the point that you want, which is people going home safe every day. And it is about people. Slide again has been distorted. It's supposed to say there, paper to people. Paper to people. Why? Well, in Shell particularly, we're brilliant at creating paper. But ultimately, it's actually about people. And we spent the last 4 years creating a competency and assurance program across the whole globe, standardized approach, where we've taken leaders, technical authorities, and particularly frontline barrier managers, the people that manage the barriers. And we've taken them through programs where we really try to work with them so that they know what to do and why they're doing it. They have the knowledge and skills to do it and the tools and equipment to do it, and they're motivated to do it. And why are they motivated? Because they feel it's the right thing to do because we take care of them and because they want to take care of the people around them. Now, how about our contractors? Who's the customer here? The customer here are all those people standing at the foot of, this is Malachi, by the way. This is the TLP that we've just launched. This is in Johor. This is the Malaysia ship construction yard we've been using. And these are the crew. These are the people we're trying to keep safe. How do you connect with them? And actually, when we start to talk to our contractors at a global level, we start to realize how very often actually we make their job very difficult. They have an HSE management system, but then we come along and tell them to use ours. They have a culture, and then we come along and try and change it to our culture. They know what their guys understand, and we try and tell them to use our communication techniques because we understand better. Now, this isn't about getting soft. We do have review plans, we do have regulatory compliance, deep dives. But actually what we find is that really this is about partnering, and particularly close partnering. Partnering is not about coming once every year. This is about the CEO partnering with somebody like me. It's about the guys on the ground partnering with our guys so that we can help each other and work together to create a partnered approach to how we're going to look at safety on their site with their people and communicate to them and change the behaviors. Now, I'm going to finish with this slide, and then I'll open a little bit to Q&A if I've got enough time to do it. If I go to a site, if you go to a site, if you go to any site, and certainly in my previous job I went to lots of sites, I reckon that you don't need to go out onto the site to know how safe it's going to be. I reckon you don't actually need to go and walk around the equipment and look at the site around housekeeping and how serious this team takes the safety. I reckon you don't even need to look at the statistics. What do you need to do? You need to sit down and have a cup of coffee in the canteen with the people. And you will know within 5 or 10 minutes whether the culture in this place is going to keep people safe or not. You will know. Because ultimately, and this is the hard part for us all to understand, but ultimately, leaders, good leaders, create an organization that has a culture that keeps people safe because they know the leader cares and because they care for each other. And if you can get that, and by the way, the best way to detect that is in the canteen having a cup of coffee, the site will be safe. And what is a good leader? Well, first of all, he's a leader. He's not an administrator. An administrator is somebody who takes in the paper, whether it's a permit to work or an site instruction, he signs it and he puts it out in his box. That's an administrator, a paper administrator. And by the way, we've got lots of so-called managers who administer brilliantly. He's not even a manager. At least a manager is very clear as to what he wants, and he's demanding it of his people, and he's managing to make sure that he gets it. But no, he's a leader. And what is a leader? What is a safety leader? He's somebody who respects and cares for his people or her people. He's somebody who inspires people around him or her to want to be safe. He's authentic, and he's therefore vulnerable. He's authentic, recognizing sometimes he doesn't know the answers when dilemmas get put in front of him. He's authentic in the sense that he doesn't walk around and away from things that he doesn't understand or he's frightened by, but actually walks in and tries to understand. Because he openly encourages dialogue. He openly encourages the communication that Hamish talked about earlier on, the senior leader and that communication gap. He openly encourages that communication so dilemmas and problems come to the surface to be addressed. You don't want the guys on the ground to be making fundamental decisions about their safety in a dilemma situation because they don't believe you understand or you care. He actively builds partnerships, particularly with the people who are working with him in his contracts. And he continuously recognizes good safety behavior. We're talking about behavior. Any mother will tell you that a child will respond to praise 5 times better, 10 times better than a child will respond to being told off. Encouraging people by continuously recognizing when they're doing good is a great motivator and driver of performance and culture. But he's also, or she's also, very disciplined to ensure, without compromise, they get the standards they need. They will not compromise on the fundamental no-go areas. If you're not going to wear a seatbelt, you're not going to work for me. And that's also part of the culture. Because a leader at times does need to step forward and make it clear what they do and don't want.